Cool. So I've been looking forward to this conversation, I think, for weeks now. Just for the people in the room, I'm Matt Beck. I'm Director of Investments at DCG. I've been in this space for about 7 years now. And so I've seen a lot over the years. And I can confidently say that this is one of the periods of time in this market that I've been most fascinated and excited. And it's largely because of some of the work that these guys who are up here are doing. So I'm really looking forward to just having kind of a wild and crazy conversation with you guys. We can take it in really any direction that you want. And I just love the opportunity that I get to sit up here with you for 45 minutes and pick your brains. So maybe we can just kick it off with a couple introductions, and you guys can tell us about what you're working on and the vision that you have for the protocols that you're working on.
Definitely. Well, hey, thank you guys for having me. My name is Robert Myers, otherwise known as Caro. That's my stage name. I'm an engineer on the Cortex team at OpenTensor, and we develop the protocol called Bittensor. It's a peer-to-peer decentralized protocol that enables artificial intelligence to learn from each other. We leverage two types of technologies. It's called mixtures of experts and distillation. With distillation, raise your hand. Has anyone played with Midjourney v5? Yeah, pretty good, right? Pretty good. So what's really cool about distillation is that what they had to do in order to create Midjourney v5 was they had 4K Hollywood movies that they trained on with the subtitles from those movies, collected, incredible amount of data there. But with distillation, I can go get 1,000 text image pairs from Midjourney v5, take a standard, stable diffusion model, and then fine tune it on that, and boom, now I have Midjourney v5. This is one of the technologies that Bittensor heavily leverages with distillation. Through the network, through the prompting network, you can create these data sets very easily. And we also leverage mixtures of experts by, instead of having one large model, we have a bunch of different specialized models wired up kind of like a series in a battery, wired up to where the voltage is higher. And that's what, something that we're working on right now is the Bittensor prompting network with the Finney subnet. And we can maybe get in a little bit. I don't want to take too much, I want to give these guys a beautiful time to talk as well. So,
my name is Greg. I am the founder CEO for Overclock Labs, and we are the core developers for Akash Network. Akash is an open compute marketplace for cloud-grade resources or low latency, high performance compute. The crux of the system, the best use case is really secondary market. So we have quite a lot of data centers that have unused capacity that they can sell on Akash. And the advantage is you get, as a user, you get access to super low cost and a wide variety of compute. It's especially great for GPUs. Turns out GPUs are the new oil. So they are, if you ask anybody doing any decent amount of training or inference or fine tuning, you'll notice GPUs are very hard to get. It turns out a lot of people are just buying up GPUs, so especially the high-end ones or H100s, which is the latest and the greatest GPUs. Elon Musk purchased about 10,000 of them a few weeks ago, and that's going to be the thing, right? So this is the new gold. So now, if you have a lot of GPUs, what do you do with them? You can either use them for training, or you can sell them on a secondary market on Akash. So we think the future of the only way you'll be able to access these GPUs in the future is going to be from each other, because right now you can't even, it's impossible to get them, not even from cloud providers, unless you know someone very higher up, right? It's very, very hard to get these GPUs. So, and this marketplace is decentralized and permissionless and fully open source. I think if you think GPUs are going to be the power of the future, we need that to be decentralized, and that's what we're working on.
Awesome. My name is Harry Grieve. I'm the co-founder of Gensyn. We're a deep learning computation protocol. So we focus entirely on training large neural networks. Similar to the other panelists, we do this in a peer-to-peer way. So we connect up all the hardware. We like to kind of describe ourselves as sitting just above the electricity layer and really just coordinating electricity and hardware to build collective intelligence. I think if I had to leave you with kind of 3 ideas from this panel, it's that Decentralization unlocks three things that cloud oligopolists currently prevent people from having. One of them is true universal scale, being able to train a neural network at universal scale. So once we as a species like go beyond Earth, being able to hook up all the devices everywhere in human civilization for training models, number one. Number two, price. They price gouge up to a kind of order of about 70%. If you have a crypto network, you don't have to do that. And thirdly, computational liberty. If you have a permissionless protocol, you can train what you want with who you want. Kind of similar to the Arweave points made earlier. If someone wants to train something and someone wants to train it for them, and there's economic, agreement on the price level, that person should be able to train that thing.
Cool. So you guys could be working on anything right now. You're clearly, all very bright, brilliant people. Why is this the thing that you guys have decided to dedicate your time and efforts to? I'd like to know that on both maybe an opportunistic level, but also more of a philosophical level. What makes you tick? What drives you to work here?
Yeah, happy to go first. For me personally, my background's in applied machine learning. So I used to build models which predicted the damage from wildfires, and constantly came up against these issues of scaling, particularly with respect to compute. There's a kind of adage that there's three things which determine model performance, data, compute, and model architecture. There's an abundance of data, model architectures. There haven't been, breakthroughs too substantial in, recent years, although distributed mixtures of experts is a good one. For us, the key kind of bottlenecks to computation. And that's something that I felt, trying to rent GPUs off of GCP and other places, it was just either painful or expensive. So that was the kind of opportunistic thing. I saw this happening around 2019, quit my job and co-founded with my co-founder Ben in 2020. I guess kind of more philosophically, I think that intelligence isn't just kind of in here, it's everywhere, and that by getting more kind of augmentation around intelligence, similar to the way that we kind of learn from people before us, language and books and things like that, being able to kind of put more of our intelligence outside of our heads into other kind of beings is a way to basically push forward civilization. We do that today with Google. So instead of remembering things, we just let Google remember it for us, and then we access that really kind of trivially for our phone. Eventually, we'll just be thinking about it. It'll be connected straight through a BCI into a neural network, and then our own organic neural networks will just be extended by, I guess, machines.
My motivation, I believe the world should be open. I mean, I'm a firm believer in open source. I've been an open source contributor for most part of my career. My career exists because of open source. I mean, I grew up in India without access to a lot of closed source software because I was priced out and just not available. So I grew up learning on open source and building open source software all my life. So I think that's how the world should be. And cloud, as you know, is increasingly, getting important, right? The cloud infrastructure, most workloads now run on the cloud. And in 7 years ago, when I was doing quite a lot of work on Kubernetes and container native infrastructure since 2013 era, and I've noticed that, and this was right about the time when cloud was getting prominence. We were seeing an anti-pattern from open source. So there's a lot of closed source software that was offered by unique cloud providers that were getting a lot of prominence, right? So that's when we started working on open source cloud, and Kubernetes came about, and Docker came about, and all these new technologies that could finally commoditize compute in a manner that doesn't really matter what cloud provider you're on, you'll be able to still have this sort of flexibility. And then the idea really came about, how can we leverage this set of open source software to create a cloud provider itself? So that opportunity really came in about of a landscape where most compute in data centers is not used, because normally when you have a data center, you want to have a peak capacity to address peak workloads. And so that was an opportunity for us to build a truly open source cloud. And today, Akash Network is a network built by hundreds of developers across the world. Overclock Labs is a company that built the initial version of the network, but I don't know if you saw the presentation earlier, but now 90% of the pull requests come from outside Overclock Labs. So 9 out of 10 pull requests. Pull requests is how you merge code to your repositories, right? So We are a very open organization. The company, Overclock Labs, has all our product meetings are fully out in the open. We've created a mechanism to not only like the software is decentralized and all that is great, but governance is all that is great. But really, if you pull enough layers and you really ask where the attack vectors are, it really comes down to who actually writes the software. And it was very critical for us to have that process of creating the roadmap be open itself. So I think we deserve an open world. And if you think about AI, which AI is undoubtedly going to become the most important technological shifts, right? That has ever happened to humanity, and we're increasingly seeing another pattern where we have OpenAI, which is not really open source at all. Just the name is OpenAI. Increasingly, OpenAI taking dominance, sucking the air out of the open source AI movement, right? So I think for open source AI to exist, we need to decentralize the access to that open source AI, and that's our mission to ensure that the access to the oil that runs AI is decentralized and open and accessible to anybody and not censored.
Yeah, so when I was, before I was working on Bittensor, I was, very much an entrepreneur. I always had that kind of knack in me. I really enjoyed building things that people used. The first app I ever built was like a Flappy Bird clone that was a picture of my Latin teacher's face from freshman year of high school. This thing went viral in my high school. I mean, we got 10,000 downloads. The seniors knew who I was. It was amazing. I caught the bug for sure. And so I'd always continued, trying to build different applications. And when I was in college, writing all of these essays, I mean, it was a chore. And so I was really interested, there's gotta be a better way, right? And so I started working on this thing called Cowboy Computer. And I was trying to use my own language models because, OpenAI was restricted at this time. GPT-3 was not, you had to have special approval. And I thought that was a very ridiculous notion. And so while I was doom scrolling on GitHub looking for something that could solve my problem, I came across Bittensor. And it really solved, the idea really solved the problem I was having, which was this censorship by OpenAI. And so, basically what Cowboy would do is it would write your essays for you, it would go and search Google, find your sources. Essentially what AutoGPT does today, that was what I was building on Cowboy. And when it was like November of 2020, and, I joined the Discord, it was introduced to Jake and Alla, realized they were building something really cool and was like, okay, I'm gonna drop everything I'm doing and start working on this because I don't think there's anything more important than open source decentralized AI. And the reason why is because if you think about, who the gatekeepers are when it comes to, whether it's like Walmart, whether it's ExxonMobil, the producers of, and then ultimately the marketplaces for goods and services, these are highly controlled, centralized places where commerce occurs. And what I was realizing was that, technology is inherently deflationary. It makes everything cheaper. And so if we're gonna have people who have basically the ultimate tool, right? The Swiss Army knife of any type of idea you can have, right? This has to be something that is open and available to everyone who's trying to build something that maybe OpenAI is not going to be so much of a fan of, And so that really inspired me to continue moving, working on Bittensor. And it's propelled us to the point where we are now with the prompting network, where if you have any type of API that uses OpenAI's API, there's a 2-line drop-in replace to replace OpenAI's API with our API. And so, and all you need to have is a Bittensor wallet right now. And, it'll hit our validator. We're giving it away for free, so please go and use it. That really, seeing where we came from to where we are today is something that's really, really inspiring, so.
Cool, so I think this is a great opportunity to shift towards the open versus closed AI system debate. And I think I know where everyone on this stage stands. We're supportive of more open AI infrastructure. But what do you guys think the biggest challenges are in terms of competing with the incumbent closed AI systems like OpenAI? it seems to me that they have a first mover advantage. Perhaps there's some proprietary work that they've not kind of opened up to the world that they've been building into the system. So how do we actually more practically think of creating an open AI infrastructure that can accomplish the ultimate goal of unseating OpenAI?
I'd focus on one thing first, which is maybe in the spirit of the question, but slightly different. It's not technological, it's narrative-wise. I think right now everyone who's on Twitter, everyone who's been kind of looking at this Yudikowsky versus Sam Altman debate, everyone who's seen the open letter for kind of pausing all training runs, anyone who hasn't, basically there's a large movement of people who want training of large language models specifically to stop. And it gained a lot of it captured a lot of public imagination for two reasons, in my opinion. Number one, like every other thing which captures public imagination, is quite extreme. Like, the kind of antidote to these problems as put forth by some of the proponents like Eliza are, we should have missile strikes on rogue data centers, which is pretty bad if you're running, decentralized hardware. You don't want to get a missile strike, number one. And number two, fundamentally, the public just do not understand these models. They're difficult enough to understand as a machine learning researcher or engineer, but moreover, if you're like a normal person, you just can't really, you don't really have a seat at the table in the discussions. I think we need a coordinated and substantial response to that from the more kind of, I hesitate to say accelerationist, because I don't like the idea of it being kind of, a false dichotomy of one side versus the other. But there needs to be a kind of proposal put forth by the open source community that these models are actually, good, and having them in the open actually makes them safer, and allowing, 10 people in Silicon Valley to hold the keys to, potentially a doom-style event for Earth probably isn't actually a good thing. So I guess I'd summarize, I think that owning the narrative and shaping it and being coordinated about it is critical.
I think open source AI is very alive and well. It's just not getting the recognition ChatGPT gets. And okay, from training, to really say, okay, GPT-4 is the latest and greatest model, whatever, right? The reason, because they have two main advantages open source AI doesn't. One is access to GPUs, and second is access to data, right? So from a resources limitation, those are the two critical elements we need to solve in order for open source AI to thrive. But open source AI is very well. It's actually taking a it's a little forked off from your ChatGPT based AI. We're seeing models like Llama, which is the Meta's version of Meta's LLM, and there's a generative thing on top of it called Alpaca, right? With Stanford's model, trained on OpenAI data, so you can't really use that for commercial purposes. And similarly, you had GPT-4 All and another one that came from Databricks that's very similar, right, to ChatGPT. But I think it really comes down to just recognition for these open source AIs, right? And that's going to be solved over time. And also, if you think about it, if you're a company, you can move fast, right? But you can only move so much. You can't move as further as you can with the community, right? So I think open source will eventually win out, and it will. It's only a matter of time. And also, products haven't really caught up to how fast these models are moving. GPT-4 is so advanced. Products are not yet being built for GPT-4. They're still stuck in GPT-3, maybe 3.5, right? And by the time products really catch up to GPT-4, I think the open source will catch up to GPT-4, right? So, and when you're building products, you don't just want to be a wrapper on top of GPT-4, on OpenAI. You want to have your own moat, and the way you get your own moat is to have your own embeddings, have your own fine tuning, have your own sort of set, right? So I think that only will come through open source AI. So I don't think the pattern that we normally see with products being built on these models is that, yes, they go and plan and experiment with all the latest and the greatest. That's GPT-4, which is extremely slow, by the way, and extremely limited. And once they know, and once they iterate, once they know what they want, they move that to GPT 3.5, which you need a little more hackish on prompting. But ultimately, I don't think no matter the advancements in the models are not going to be translated into actual results and actual usable things people are building. And I think open source AI is going to be the future.
Yeah, so I completely agree with these, with them, but also I think that the open AI or open source AI, a real problem right now, and it's that investors of OpenAI realize that OpenAI has no actual moat. It's not the model, because that can be very easily distilled. With GPT for all, what we've seen with Alpaca, this can be distilled. So there is no data moat there, right? We recognize that a 6 billion that's fine-tuned on a specific downstream task outperforms even GPT-4, GPT 3.5 Turbo, outperforms all of it when it's fine-tuned, even at the smaller scale. So scale is not going to win. So what the investors of OpenAI and maybe even the individuals at OpenAI have realized is the only way to build a real moat is to do regulatory capture, where they create laws such that where open source AI wouldn't even be able to exist. And I think that this is one of the biggest threats to open source AI right now, not because of any type of fundamental technology, not because the applications are not getting adoption, but because they were going to rely on the regulators to basically make it illegal to do open source AI in the name of alignment. Now, I would argue that anything that's done in public we can all see and all verify together is probably going to be a better alignment solution than, like what we were saying, individuals in Silicon Valley who are unelected, who do not represent the interests of whether it's Americans or the international community. And as a result of this, I think that if we continue heading down this way, it could end up very badly for, the individuals, right? Instead of, we're OpenAI, it's a winner take all. And so as a result of this, I think it's more important than ever that we try to decentralize this technology before it's too late. Once the cat's out of the bag, they can't stop us. And so, this is something that, is something that we should really be focusing on as as the open source community. And I think why it's so important that the technologies that myself and my co-hosts here are building is more important than ever.
I just add to that we've seen this happen with GDPR. The only people that benefited from GDPR were big tech, because it killed everybody else. No one could compete, no one can pay the legal fees. It's happening again. And it's not just kind of theoretical. If you look at the EU Data Act, there are clauses in there which have been put in by people like OpenAI. I think it's the EU Data Act. It's one of them. OpenAI put in a data act which would abscond itself from any legal kind of blowback for training LLMs. People who are slightly, who are closed and who are ahead of the game, like OpenAI, can do this. Because they have that kind of first mover advantage, and they want to basically pull the ladder up behind them. And as we saw with GDPR, it results in a hellscape for users. Nobody likes the cookie pop-ups.
Yeah, and so there's things like bias, regulatory capture. Like, these have huge implications down the line if they're not managed properly. And for me, I think it's about alternatives. It's not necessarily about like one system beating out the other, though that may happen, but it's certainly about alternatives. So in the same way that Bitcoin was an alternative form of money or store of value outside of the traditional financial system, and that has characteristics and pros and cons. And then there's the dollar, which you can go up to a store and buy your groceries with, but it's stable. That has pros and cons. But it's the idea that there's these alternative systems that people have the freedom and ability to opt into for different purposes that suit their needs. So I think that's just super important to me. What do you guys think are the biggest challenges for truly decentralized open AI to reach its potential and the vision that I think we all share?
So, like I said, regulatory capture, I think that's coming down the pipe faster than we think. We have individuals who may or may not be invested in OpenAI. At least we know for sure they're invested in Microsoft, who stands to gain so much from the already monopolistic powers they have through their Office 365 suite. If you look at what happened to Slack, I mean, their business was decimated because of the monopolistic practices of Microsoft. And we're going to see that again with OpenAI. OpenAI has no moat, like I was just saying. I mean, the data can be distilled. The scale is not going to ultimately, be the thing that, like, if you can distill it down to a 6 billion, right, it's much cheaper to run that 6 billion. So, they're going to get outcompeted on cost as a result, right? So the way that the threats that I see coming down the pipe is regulatory, right? Not only are we experiencing regulatory scrutiny, in the greater crypto field right now, through, maybe you could call it a PSYOP, but we're definitely seeing movements towards, the people who have money invested and have already placed their bets are already seeing that OpenAI is not going to be able to secure their moat because Alpaca came out like 2 days later after GPT-4 came out. And so in GPT-4, all his data set, is a really incredible data set. If you guys haven't fine-tuned on it, I recommend you do, because it's fantastic. And so I think that the biggest threats that, at least here in America, is going to be that regulatory capture. But overall, I think that we're going to, as a result of that, see other places flourish and utilize that to their advantage.
And so it sounds like to me what you're saying is that because there's no moat, that ultimately these AI,
it's got to be open.
And intelligence will become commoditized.
Exactly.
And so, so can you talk a little bit more about, okay, in this world where AI and intelligence is commoditized, basically, why it's important to have kind of a decentralized, open system like this?
Yeah. So when you have one person who's steering for all of us, right? Let's call them the bus driver, and they're driving erratically. You should be able to get up and say, hey man, maybe don't go press on the gas too fast, or don't take that turn so hard. But unfortunately, there is no accountability right now. All we can do is yell about it on Twitter, but how much does that actually move the ball down the field? It doesn't. And so the reason why it's so important to ensure that we have decentralized AI and open source AI is not just so that we can all audit if it's safe or not. Not only can we audit what it was trained on and what it does, but we can leverage that in any way that we please. If you have to sign up for a wait list to be able to use this API that you can't build on your own because they are utilizing either regulatory capture or economies of scale, by having this technology in the hands of everyone, I think that with the amount of progress and economic growth we will see as a result is much beneficial to our children and our children's children. If a few people have the means, if a few people own the means of labor and the means of production, we move to a world of neo-feudalism where we have a few lords and a million serfs. This is not what, at least America was built upon. That was not the concept America was built on. That was not the concept that the Western world was built on. It was built on this idea of the individual being able to go out and build their own businesses and be able to live their own life and make their own decisions for them. If we move towards a system of neo-feudalism, I think that it's going to be very bad, maybe not for us, but for our kids and our grandkids. And that's why open source AI and making sure that this is in the hands of everyone. Everyone has access to this type of labor. If labor goes to zero because we're able to, like intellectual labor, I mean, now me augmented with the Bittensor prompting network when I'm doing my coding, like when I'm writing code, I can write it 10 to 100 times faster. I become a 1000x engineer with this technology. And so the amount of work that I can get done is so much better. It's so much faster. And as a result, that if time is equal to money, and I'm saving time, I'm saving money. Now, if only a few people can access that technology, if only the lords can access that technology, then that's not good for anybody, right? Except for the lords. And so I think that us as the individuals, right, we should ask ourselves, do we want democracy or do we want tyranny?
There's already a rumor that AGI is here, and people are keeping it secret because you can make a lot of money. AGI means artificial general intelligence, right? So when that happens, it's going to be a new world. It's going to be a different world. It's not going to be the world that you and I know, right? So it's very, very, very scary to think about the fact that there are going to be very few people that control it. You're already seeing right now with OpenAI API access, right? If you go to a hackathon in San Francisco, your biggest prize is API credits. That's more valuable than money. Access to OpenAI API is more valuable than money right now. And we're already seeing that. And the question, and they can, if you say the wrong thing, a wrong prompt, your access gets cut. So one company, one man controlling that, right? Is that the future that you want, or do you want a future where all of us have a say in what we want to see and who should get access to the APIs, right? So it's scary as it is right now, but with AGI, it's going to be even more scarier. And I mean, it's going to be very obvious. Like if people that understand the value of AGI, if they built it, if they're going to keep it to themselves, there's no incentive for them to release it to the world, right? They can make there's an amazing book, an essay by this, I forgot the actual author, but it talks about like what would happen if someone has access to AGI, right? They would not release it to the world, right? So that's really scary. That's really scary. They could capture so much value without having to sell it for $20 a pop or something,
So I would actually just underscore Rob's point by saying, I think it's less like the people who, like an individual citizen person, like training a model, and more about giving you the opportunity to like opt out of the kind of neo-feudalism, as you mentioned, which I would agree with, or to basically to kind of like fight back. But I don't think it's at the kind of, I think everything starts at the individual level, but I think it allows well-financed and coordinated groups to actually push back. Because right now we're in a point where the number of like the fragmentation in the world is starting to look kind of similar to the Victorian era, with like, the British East India Company and stuff like that, where there's these kind of all-powerful, almost like nation-state level powerful entities. Microsoft would probably be the one which is the most in vogue right now. With OpenAI, they are at the point where they are, they're a law unto themselves, essentially. And if they create AGI first, then they certainly are. That's the first thing I'd say. I'd say the second thing, just in the spirit of the question, like what's the hardest thing? I'd actually say on a technical side, it's verifying deep learning training. And that's specifically for two reasons. The first is neural networks, the way they've been designed today, are inherently probabilistic. So they don't kind of create outcomes which are deterministic across devices, because we never had to. And as a result, if you want to use hashing, to kind of confirm outputs and compare them, similar to how Bitcoin works, that doesn't work because a bit flipped in the wrong direction destroys a hash. That's number one. And number two, they're very state dependent. So it's hard kind of to zoom in halfway through a neural network training run and say, okay, I'm going to check that point. Unlike a task like, say, rendering, where when you're rendering, you can render the different bits of the screen and then zoom in on one area, and it's independent of all the other areas, and you can re-render it. With a neural network, you can't do that. You have to train the entire network up to that point, and then check there. That's something that we've dedicated about 2 years to solving, mainly through cryptographic proofs, and also through basically reproducibility research. How can you let neural networks train across different heterogeneous devices? I think allowing neural networks to train, not just on like an A100 or a V100, but on everything, including stuff like, MacBook, M1 and M2 chips, also kind of more custom ASICs like Graph Core IPUs is essential, because there's centralization happening at the kind of higher level of intelligence in terms of GPT-4, but there's also a huge amount of centralization happening lower down the stack in terms of the actual chips themselves. And if you go lower than the chip level to the fabrication level, then you're basically just at the 5 nanometer level, you're at basically TSMC in Taiwan, who are basically the only people who are building it. And the amount of centralization risk there is unparalleled. It's probably worse than OpenAI, in my opinion.
So what do we do about that?
That's a hardware question, which is harder than the software questions, in my opinion, mainly because of the huge capital investments that you have to kind of outlay to. If you're trying to build 5 nanometer like wafers, like, you're in you're in a proper industrial factory. You know, it's highly capital intensive. I think the answer, I think that's an answer. I don't have like a solid answer to how to deal with the hardware issue, but the way we can solve it at the software level at least is by having the ability to be agnostic to the overall chips. You know, the TSMC thing's like a geopolitical issue, but slightly higher up when it comes to like, okay, like, am I going to be NVIDIA only? Am I going to be AMD only? Will I work on a, you know, Google TPU pod? Can I work on an M1, M2 MacBook? Could I run a you know, neural network training job out of a Tesla? Things like that. I think everything's going to become more interconnected, number one, and number two, being able to train across all these devices is going to be critical to that.
Cool. I think that's a fantastic answer. One of the biggest challenges I think I see at the moment is you have an insane amount of innovation that's happening on the AI front. You have, you know, new things that are happening every day. It's almost impossible for the human mind to process and keep up with. So there's a lot of people working on these types of problems. How do we draw more of these engineers into kind of like the intersection of AI and Web3? Because I think a lot of kind of like the more traditional ML engineers, you know, they stay in almost like the Web 2 version of ML, and they're a little bit more leery or like reluctant to get involved in some of the things that you guys are working on. So how do we sort of like draw them in? Do you guys have ideas about that?
I think one of the best ways to do it is access. Like what we were just saying, you know, getting GPT-4 access is better than money, right? And so if we can give them something like that, give them that access, but in a permissionless way, I think that's really good. Okay, well, I have to wait 2 weeks and get approved, and my app's got to go through this, you know, 7 safety people, and you know, it's totally not It's not a convenient. It's not a convenient process. It's not permissionless. And as a result, you know, I think that really turns a lot of developers off from using that technology, right? And so if we can give them access to this technology, I think that that's going to remedy this situation very greatly. And also, you know, I think that I was speaking earlier today, a lot of people don't even know this technology exists. And so if they don't know it's happening, then the only thing that takes up in their mind is something like ChatGPT. In fact, I saw something, I mean, anecdotally on Twitter, but they had like an email bot, and it was writing emails for them, and at the bottom it was like written by AI. They changed it to written by ChatGPT, and the respondents went up by 11%. And so there was something, I think there's something to be said that OpenAI's ChatGPT has this really great brand with, you know, let's just say the average individual. And so what we need to do is move, or at least get into that space right there, this ability that, hey, you have better access, you have better options, it's much more fair, you know, to the average individual than something like ChatGPT.
Access, right? So one of the things that Akash is launching GPUs very soon. We have them in test run right now. We're onboarding providers. One of the things that we will be launching the mainnet is with H100s. Now, H100s are the top of the line GPUs. It's impossible to get them from anyone. And we are able to secure them because people bought H100s and are holding on to them. And they have no way to sell them except on Akash. So a decentralized system is actually helping them get liquidity on their, you know, dead asset, right? Yeah. So Akash will be the only place for machine learning devs to get H100s, and H100s are like 6 times faster than A100s for certain use cases, right? Like, yeah. So giving like AI developers what they cannot get with the current centralized infrastructure will be the way to get Web3 people onto Akash. And I tried the other way. I do a lot of hackathons, and you know, the hackathons today in San Francisco are, for AI especially, it's just next level, right? Like if you're, on average, you see 400 to 500 people. The other day I went to a meetup, there were 5,000 developers at a meetup for AI meetup, right? So there's a lot of developers have no idea about what Web3 or what we can offer. And try to onboard a Web3 AI dev onto Akash is very, very hard, because for them, when you say blockchain, it's about Bitcoin, right? Nobody, like, beyond Bitcoin, they have no idea what a blockchain is. And for them to like say you need to get a Kepler wallet and go on Cosmos, yada, yada, I mean, it's just, you know, it's not gonna happen, right? So, but it will happen when you say you have H100s.
Yeah.
Because they will do the extra work to get on, do the onboarding, right? Because that's a big barrier. So it really comes down to providing, offering something that the market doesn't have. And what Web3 is really, really, really good at is sourcing supply, right? I mean, we can incentivize supply, we can do a lot of cool things. I mean, Web3 is really good at unlocking network effects because it has this game mechanic primitives that could be employed, right? So, and this and that could essentially unlock large coordination schemes. So using that and offering a product that's compelling enough for AI devs in Web 2, I think is a way to go. And we're already starting to see a lot of like AI devs. If you walk down Hayes Valley and you say you have H100s, you get kidnapped. Basically, it's serious, right? We're already seeing like a lot of them like looking at Akash for this very, very reason. Some believe, some don't, but in the only way they'll believe is when we actually have them. So,
I'd make a brief anti-point, which is everyone here is orange-pilled to some extent, and everyone kind of gets it, and everyone's sure, but like the majority, as you said, of machine learning engineers do not get it and do not care and do not give a fuck about the philosophy and they don't care if it's decentralized, they don't care if it's like censorship resistant. All they care about is access, so like scale, but also price. And one of the kind of trapdoors which we've kind of like tiptoed around multiple times in our journey so far is lots of people saying, oh, do like generative art for like NFTs or like do, some super like Web3 for Web3 or crypto for crypto type use case. I think something core is to be like crypto for everything else because 99.9999999% of the demand is out there. I think ultimately it will flip and the majority of it will be in the kind of crypto universe ultimately, but right now it's not. So focusing and being very kind of like Web 2 friendly, I think. It's like one thing is like, obviously we all use native tokens, but like being able to pay like in dollars is like an example, like, meet them where they are. If someone has to buy like some coin, which you have to hold on their balance sheet to like use your product, like that's like, some people just can't even do that, right? There's just like an access issue immediately. So yeah, and that kind of anti-point would be that.
No, I agree. I personal experience onboarding AI devs to Akash has been extremely painful, and a lot of them has to be like, okay, why do I have to buy your token? Like yada yada yada, right? So making it super simple and having that fiat on ramp is super helpful. But again, the challenge there is to how do you compromise between non-custodialness and custodial-based services. So we're working very hard to keep it non-custodial as much as we can. So providing USDC payments, for example, but not just credit cards, or maybe working with other partners that could provide us the credit card mechanisms to onboard. But yeah, so if ultimately it comes down to like the sweetness, right? H100's availability, I think, is gonna get us there.
Cool. So I think I have time for one more question for you guys. What is the thing that's sitting in your brain based on the work that you've been doing that you're most excited about, that you wish you could kind of expose or reveal to this room? Like what is that one thing where you're like, oh man, if only people could see this?
Yeah, so something that, there's a lot of really great projects being built on Bittensor right now, utilizing the prompting API. But something that, we're really excited and we're gonna be pushing out in the next couple weeks is our own pre-trained model. We partnered with Cerebras to create a 2.7 billion hyperparameter model that has an AK sequence length. This is it was also trained on 1.2 trillion tokens. So exactly like Llama, except it has an AK sequence length, which is 4 times better than GPT-J. It's 2 times better than stable LM. And what's really promising and exciting about this is that we're offering a bedrock for people to be able to participate and get in with a consumer-grade hardware. So like a 4090, a 3090, that it fits in the VRAM, and you can fine-tune it down to any downstream task you like and then deploy that into Bittensor. So you can using the prompting network, you can go and create the fine-tuning data set, right? You take that fine-tuning data set, you fine-tune your own language model, you put that back up in there, into the network, right? And then it just recursively, continually making it better. This is something that is really exciting. We'll have more updates and information over the next couple of weeks, but stay tuned because we're almost finished. So.
Amazing.
I think the human experience is going to totally change. And I think that kind of what it means to be human is going to completely change as well. So I kind of always go back to that idea of like how Google changed things for people, where your memory is extended by the internet. There are things on the internet that you can interface. You have kind of two interfaces. You've got like the physical interface, so like a laptop or a mobile phone, and then you've got the kind of search function, which would be like Google, and then it gets you the information, and that's an extension of your brain to some extent. I think that the power of that like extended faculty that we have is going to increase by orders of magnitude to a point where in the next 5 years, the world will be completely unrecognizable. Like it will just be beyond our like wildest imagination. And yeah, that's the thing I'm most excited about.
I think like when I talk to developers, people don't realize we actually have a viable open source cloud. Like an open source cloud, right? So I think that's a big deal for me and a big deal for, I think, the world, right? Like, and once people actually use Akash, then they realize and then they see the experience. And I think, and when they realize this open source cloud is not only just open source, but it's also non-custodial, it's permissionless, censorship resistant. It's a very, very powerful thing to have, right? As a foundation to build their applications and our software, right? So for me, just like using Akash every day, I mean, it's very few products that I actually use that are decentralized every day, right? Like I use Akash because I'm a developer and I code and I deploy, right? So, and it's just amazing. And now the fact that, now that you can actually run an alpaca on a fully decentralized network and pay using a token without giving your email address or anything, it's another like sort of like amazing thing for as someone working in AI, right? So it's like the open source is the world should be.
Cool. Well, Harry, Greg, Caro, it's been fantastic talking to you guys. Thank you guys for sharing your wisdom. And I'm sure this conversation will continue probably hours into the evening with people around here. So thank you guys very much.